Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Rebecca Cole-Trump, and I am the Associate Vice President of Annual Giving at the Rutgers University Foundation. Thank you all for being with us today for Full Plates, Hungry Minds, the Fight to Assure Food Security at Rutgers. Today is Giving Tuesday, a global giving movement held each year on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. This year, the Rutgers community is shining a light on student food insecurity, a growing problem on college campuses as students worry about how they will afford their next meal. To begin today's presentation on this important topic, I'd like to introduce Dr. Laura Lawson, who serves as Interim Executive Dean of Agriculture and Natural Resources at Rutgers University, leading both the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences and the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station. Laura came to Rutgers in 2010 to serve as Professor and Chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture. In 2015, she was appointed Dean of Agriculture and Urban Programs, charged with supporting academic and outreach efforts that bridge urban and suburban communities with agriculture so as to enhance the economy, landscape, and culture of New Jersey. Please note all attendees have been placed on mute for the duration of this discussion. If you have questions, please submit them by the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. We will get to as many questions as possible. It is now my privilege to turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Rebecca, and hello, everyone. I see some friends in the audience, and so a special hello out to everyone. I'm delighted to be part of this important effort, especially on Giving Tuesday, and this opportunity to raise awareness about food insecurity on our campus and to find solutions. When I look back on my college years, I realized that my budding recognition of food insecurity is one of the reasons I pursued my professional and academic careers in the last 30 plus years. For me, as for many students, college was a critical time to become independent and to take the burden off of my family. Back then, it wasn't as financially challenging as it is today to put yourself through school, but it still was a challenge to meet ends meet, especially with the calculations of your financial aid package and what it left you for the month. In my case, the opportunity to grow my own food as part of my housing situation enabled me to stretch my limited funds without jeopardizing my health. And the empowerment that I felt at this ability led me to my academic pursuit of urban agriculture and community engagement in hopes that I could help others achieve that same level of empowerment. In the intervening years, I have learned a lot more about the causes of food insecurity and how much more work there is to do within our schools, our communities, and globally. Food insecurity is the disruption of food intake or eating patterns because of lack of money and other resources. It impacts the amount, quality, variety, and desirability of food. According to the USDA, more than 38 million people, including 12 million children in the United States, are food insecure. Food insecurity also concerns roughly 40% of four-year college students. In our classrooms, students may not acknowledge that they've missed a meal or eaten something cheap and unhealthy, but it manifests in fatigue, inability to focus, and poor study habits. Fortunately, we can do a lot about this. So far, 4 states, California, New Jersey, Maryland, and Minnesota, have passed legislation to allocate funding to higher education institutions, specifically to address food insecurity. In May 2019, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy signed a comprehensive legislative package to fight hunger in our state. One of the areas addressed in this is a college campus hunger initiative. It's a $1 million Hunger-Free Campus Act that requires the New Jersey State Secretary of Higher Education to establish a grant program to address food insecurity among students enrolled in public colleges and universities. And we are one of the 11 in New Jersey that are recipients. Rutgers has been a little ahead of government efforts to identify and address food insecurity on college campuses. Rutgers New Brunswick officially launched its first food pantry in the fall of 2016, and Rutgers Newark and Camden also have food pantries as well. And you'll be hearing from Kara later about some of the work that she's done along with these efforts to really inventory what our students' needs are. With our expertise in food, nutrition, and production, and our commitment to serving the state, the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences and the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station have taken a leadership role in addressing issues of food insecurity. For example, several years ago when we moved our student farm to Rutgers Gardens, we established a practice of donating fresh produce to hunger organizations. That effort has expanded as we've grown the garden of the farm, and we now provide fresh produce all summer long to the Student Food Pantry, Elijah's Promise, Global Grace Cafe, as well as other food banks, while also selling at the farmers market and having our own community-supported agriculture. Our Snyder Farm in Pittsdown, New Jersey, is dedicated to research on sustainable agriculture and produces a variety of food and fiber products. Over the past 20 years, the researchers and staff there have donated a lot of the food that is grown to the local Pittsdown Food Pantry. And our school leads the New Jersey Youth Institute of the World Food Prize, which is a national effort to engage high school students in the discussions of global food insecurity and aims to encourage careers addressing food insecurity. Participating students are eligible for scholarships and internship opportunities at the USDA and internationally. Our New Brunswick Community Farmers Market, located just off of Cook campus, is another program that has a mission to increase access and consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables, particularly serving low-income, food insecure residents of New Brunswick. The market is equipped to take SNAP and EBT cards, WIC checks, and senior farmers market nutrition program checks. And it also provides special vouchers called Market Bucks that can be used for free produce from the market. And the New Brunswick Community Farmers Market, as well as on campus, we have community gardens for neighbors, students, faculty, and staff so that they can grow their own food. And many of our extension agents across the state work with community garden programs to grow food that is often donated to food banks. And lastly, many of you are already aware of Rutgers Against Hunger, a university-wide initiative that is organized through Rutgers Cooperative Extension. It enlists the assistance of Rutgers students, faculty, staff, alumni, and concerned public in efforts to raise awareness about food insecurity through our communities, stock food banks and pantries, and provide consumer education on nutrition, deliver technical and organizational support to community groups, and conduct research towards understanding and improving food security, as well as food production, packaging, and distribution. And central to our efforts at Rutgers to understand the extent of the problem and also to address it now is our own Kara Cute, who is our presenter today. Kara is an assistant extension specialist in the Department of Human Ecology. She started at Rutgers as a graduate student in 1995, earning her PhD in psychology. As a health psychologist, she studies community food security, risk communication, and public perceptions of food-related issues, including food safety and genetically engineered foods. In addition, she works with nutrition programs around the country to understand food security, food safety, and emergency preparedness for homebound seniors and others. In her ongoing role as an assistant extension specialist on the New Brunswick campus, she has been deeply engaged in the work in the New Brunswick community. We are indebted to Kara and other Rutgers colleagues who are working to alleviate food insecurity on campus. Kara's research and her service reflect the very best of SEBS and Rutgers. So I'm delighted to call her a colleague and to introduce her today. And I give it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm just going to take a second to share my screen. All right. Okay, well,
Carol,
thank you. You're seeing the wrong one. Oh, okay. Thanks for letting me know. Now, are you seeing the correct one?
Looks perfect.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today about food insecurity among Rutgers, New Brunswick students. As Dean Lawson mentioned, I'm a research psychologist, and I've been doing work on issues of hunger and food insecurity in the city of New Brunswick for many years. New Brunswick, as I'm sure many of you know, is a city where many residents struggle to get enough food for themselves and their families, and the number of pantries in the city has been increasing over the years. Back in 2016, a colleague and I were doing interviews with folks who run food pantries around the city. We kept hearing about Rutgers students using the pantries more often than ever before. And I specifically remember one day sitting in a food pantry in a basement of a church right off of campus. And the director of the pantry said, I just don't know what is going on over there, but we are seeing 20 to 30 Rutgers students a week coming in to get food. And we've never seen anything like that before. And it wasn't just him, we were hearing it over and over again. So as a result of these conversations, I reached out to Rutgers Student Affairs to see if they were hearing similar things. And I was put in touch with Carrie Wilson. Carrie and I met, and she told me that there was already a plan in place to start an on-campus food pantry for students, and she was going to run it out of her office. And at that point, we had no idea how many students needed it, how many students would use it, but she knew that there was likely enough demand that she wanted to try it and just see what happened. And that first day that Carrie and I met to talk about the pantry, she said to me, well, I'm working on a survey of Rutgers students because we want to understand how big of a problem this is here. And I said to her, well, I'm a survey researcher, so if you want me to take a quick look at your survey, I would be happy to. And she said, that would be great. I don't really know that much about survey research. So I thought it would take me about 20 minutes to 30 minutes to take a quick look at the survey. 5 years later, we're still working together very closely. And I ended up really taking over more of the research and the survey side of this issue, whereas Carrie and the Division of Student Affairs does most of the programming, but we work closely together on both of those issues. So today I'm going to present some of those findings from our ongoing research that we've been working on, as well as some of the programming that's been happening, again, largely through the Division of Student Affairs. And I'm also going to provide some national context, because it turns out that at the same time that Carrie and I were talking about these issues, the same kinds of conversations were happening around the country as people were starting to identify, and had already in many cases identified, that this was an issue on their campuses. And today I'm going to be focusing on Rutgers, New Brunswick. But as Laura just mentioned, there are pantries and there's work being done at Rutgers Newark and Rutgers Camden, and a lot of innovative programming, but I'm focusing on New Brunswick because that's where I work and that's what I know. Okay. So, and there's Carrie in the original student food pantry that was open in 2016. It was located in the Offcampus Living and Community Partnerships building on Mine Street, although it's moved since, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so every now and then, not very often, but every now and then, someone will say to me, well, why does Rutgers have to worry about food insecurity among its students? You know, why is it Rutgers is an institution of higher learning? Why is it something that they should be concerned with? And aside from the fact that Rutgers cares very deeply about its students and food is a human right, there are other reasons in addition. We know from research that's been done here and at other schools that food insecurity is related to poor academic outcomes. Students who are food insecure, have lower GPAs, are more likely to drop classes, and have lower graduation rates. In addition, it's related to a number of health concerns, including increased stress, depression, and obesity. So there are a lot of reasons that we have to be addressing this issue among our students. Okay, so as I mentioned, we did a survey in 2016, but we have also done a survey in 2019. And today I'm going to be focusing more on that 2019 survey, although I'll show some results from both. I probably don't have to remind you all that 2019 was sort of the before times, pre-COVID. So students were on campus still when we did this survey. And this picture is just the invitation that was sent out to students to participate. We collected our data in November and December of 2019, so the end of that fall semester. It was an online survey. All matriculated students were invited to participate, and we got over 5,000 undergraduates and over 1,000 graduate students who responded. With decent response rates, they're actually quite good for Rutgers surveys. We tend to get very low response rates. And it's really important to note that we were able to analyze the samples that we got, and we know that they look very much like the student body as a whole, with a few minor differences, but we are very comfortable generalizing from our sample to the population as a whole, knowing that our sample is generally representative. Okay, so Laura did a great job defining food insecurity. I'm coming back to this definition because if we're going to talk about how we measured it, we need to first define it. And so I'm using a little bit more limited definition here, where food insecurity is a limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate and safe foods. And this is how the USDA defines it. And for those of us who tend to use surveys to study this issue, we use a USA designed household food security survey module. So it's a survey module. It has 18 questions. The questions all focus on money and being able to afford food. So it's really looking at food security from a financial perspective pretty exclusively. And depending on how someone answers those questions, they're placed into one of 4 groups as pictured here. And I really like this image because it highlights how important it is to recognize that food insecurity is really, it occurs on a spectrum, right? So for some people, food insecurity might look like worrying a lot about how they're going to afford their next meal, or not eating a balanced diet because they can't afford it. And it can go all the way down to people who are skipping meals, don't eat for an entire day, are losing weight because they can't afford to eat, right? So when we talk about food insecure students, it's just important to keep in mind that food insecurity doesn't look the same for everyone, and there's really a range of what a food insecure student might be experiencing. Okay, so using that same color scheme, this is what we found. Now I'm focusing right here on undergraduates in our 2019 survey. So those 2 bottom groups, that low and very low food security, are combined to through the USDA definition. Those are the 2 groups that are considered food insecure. So we see a rate of 31.5% of our undergraduate students reported experiencing food insecurity in the past 30 days. I would point your attention to that yellow bar, though, also that 20.3 tells us that about 1 in 5 students is technically food secure. However, they've indicated that they're at some risk for food insecurity, whether they probably answered 1 question saying maybe that they were worried or not eating a balanced diet. Okay, so I'm going to provide, as I mentioned, it's an 18-item survey instrument, but I'm going to provide just 4 questions to give you a sense of the kinds of things that we were asking about and how our undergraduate students responded. So I could not afford to eat balanced meals was the one that the highest number of students endorsed. So just about 42% said that statement was sometimes or always true for them in the past 30 days. Over 30% said that they were worried that their food would run out before they got money to buy more. About 1 in 5 said that they were hungry but didn't eat because there was not enough money for food. So that's where we're starting to really get into those more severe forms of food insecurity. And then finally, about 1 in 10 said that they lost weight because there was not enough money for food. And that's one of the most severe indicators, or an indicator of the most severe food insecurity. Okay, so I just mentioned that we had 31.5% of our undergraduates who were experiencing food insecurity. When we look at graduate students in 2019, we see a slightly lower percentage, just 29.9%, really not terrifically different, but slightly lower. And then if we want to compare to where we were, we can see that the numbers were slightly higher in 2016, but that same pattern of undergraduates having higher rates of food insecurity than graduate students is the same. And I would just, there are a lot of reasons that I don't really look at these numbers and think, oh, well, we've definitely been solving the problem. We've definitely improved food insecurity. Part of it has to do with the survey methodology is slightly different from the 2016 to the 2019 administration. So when I take these numbers together, my takeaway is basically that about 1 in 3 Rutgers, New Brunswick students report experiencing food insecurity in the past 30 days. And that's a lot. So, okay, it's also important to recognize that certain groups of undergraduate students are more likely to be food insecure than others. And I'm just presenting some. There are many different groups that have higher risk, but I am going to focus on just a couple of groups here. And the first is, and again, this is among undergraduates, Black undergraduate students are significantly more likely to be food insecure than white students. And I have the group that's more likely to be food insecure highlighted or bolded and a little bit larger. And Black students are actually the only group of students that we see that has a food insecurity rate of just over 50%. So there's a significant gap between Black and white students. We see a similar but lower gap between Hispanic and white students. At 15%, we see a similar gap between first generation students and those who are not. And so a first generation student is a student who whose parents have not attended college. So we see that difference there. And then finally, a 13% gap between students who are employed and those who are not. And that does make some degree of sense if you think about it, because students who don't have money for food are more likely to go out and get a job. Okay, so now I also want to highlight some gaps that probably won't be too surprising to us here. Students who live off campus are more likely to be food insecure than those who live on campus. And then similarly, students without a meal plan are more likely to be food insecure than those that have a meal plan. So of course, there's probably a lot of overlap here between these groups, right? Students who live on campus are more likely to have a meal plan. And in some cases, for first year students are required to have a meal plan. What might be a little less intuitive is that some students with a meal plan are food insecure. And in our 2016 data, we actually did an analysis where we could see how many meals they had on their meal plan. And there was a linear relationship between that and how likely they were to be food insecure. So the fewer meals they had, the more likely they were to be food insecure. And it's also worth noting that we fielded this survey both years at the end of the semester. So those students who had lower meal plans most likely had run out of meals by the time that we were talking to them. So they were food insecure later in the semester. And we might have seen a lower number if we had fielded the survey earlier in the semester. Okay, so another thing that we were really interested in was looking at awareness of the student food pantry. And we found, now again, I have to say this was in 2019, and Carrie Wilson believes that these numbers are probably lower now post-pandemic after not having had students on campus for an extended period of time. But we see that just about 70% of undergraduate students are aware of the student food pantry. And I should point out that the food pantry does all kinds of different outreach. This is their Instagram page. You can see here they do empty stomachs plate campaign where students write what they can't do on an empty stomach, and they post the plates all over the student center. They're really trying, there's some materials that are presented to students in new student orientation. There's really, the pantry is trying to do everything that they can to increase awareness, and they fully recognize that that we're missing students. We haven't made all of our students aware of the pantry. Okay, so thinking about, our number, we have 31.5%. What does that mean, right? What is that? What do we look like compared to other schools? And so I want to provide a little bit of a national and state context here. In 2019, the Hope Center for College Community and Justice, which is a research institute at Temple University, conducted, and they do this almost every year, they conduct large surveys with a national sample. So they had 56 colleges and universities, four-year institutions, the majority of which were public institutions, respond to a survey right around the same time that our survey was fielded. And they found that 33% of students in that national sample were food insecure over the past 30 days. Now, I want to point out that although it's a national sample, they can't do that same representativeness analysis that we did of our sample. So they can't say it's necessarily 33% of all college students, because they just don't know that this is representative of all college students, but it is the best estimate that we have. So we always rely on it because there is no other really large national survey like that. So again, during that same time frame, We at Rutgers were at 31.5%. So we're really pretty similar to that national average as best that we are able to measure it. Okay, so in terms of New Jersey, the Hope Center also worked with the Office of the Secretary of Higher Education on a survey of the New Jersey community colleges. 17 out of our 18 community colleges participated, and they found, this was also in 2019, they found that 39% of respondents were food insecure in the past 30 days. So this pattern of the community college students being more food insecure is very common, and we see that pretty much across the board in every state that community college students are experiencing more food insecurity. Okay, so I'm sure many of you are wondering, what happened to college student food insecurity during COVID? And we all, I'm sure, saw the news coverage of how, especially in the early phases of the pandemic, there were these giant spikes in food insecurity, unbelievable lines at food pantries across the country, including very much in New Jersey. So we did not do a similar type of survey of our students during this point in time, but we do have Hope Center data that I'm going to share with you that can give us some insights. So in April and May of 2020, Hope Center was able to do a survey where they found 38% of students at four-year institutions were affected by food insecurity. So most of those students at this point in the pandemic were living, had moved off campus if they were on campus in the first place. Many had moved back in with their families. So it was, that spike seems to be reflected in these numbers. They did another survey more recently, March of 2021, and they found that the food insecurity rates had dropped back down closer to where they were pre-pandemic in March of 2021. So there seems like there was a spike perhaps, but it's really hard to say exactly what happened. And it's also interesting to think about, for some students, they were living on campus, they were protected by living in a dorm, having a meal plan, and they may have moved back in with food insecure families. And for other students, their food insecurity was stemming more from living independently. And when they moved home with their families and weren't paying rent or buying their own food anymore, they may have become more food secure. So I think there was a lot of churn and a lot of different scenarios playing out during that time. But as I said, we don't have similar data on Rutgers students. Okay, so I've presented quite a few statistics here, and I would like to take a second and just share something that a student wrote at the end of our 2019 survey. We leave it open for students to write in and tell us sort of, is there anything else that you'd like us to know about this? And one of the students wrote in, I experienced an extremely difficult, trying time earlier this year that forced me to couch surf and rely on friends for food and finances. And while I knew the food pantry was available, I sometimes wasn't even able to afford the commute onto campus to access food. Further, the food pantry hours weren't always convenient for me. Because of the food and housing instability I experienced, I found it almost impossible to focus on school, let alone prioritize time for my classes or assignments. It took weeks of not showing up to sessions for me to finally admit to myself and my teachers that something was going on. So there's so much in this quote from this student, which part of it gets at, I knew the food pantry was available, but I couldn't even afford the commute onto campus to access it, right? So there's all layers of other kinds of basic needs insecurity here: transportation insecurity, housing insecurity, right? So food insecurity isn't the only basic needs insecurity that our students are dealing with. It's a really broad problem, and it's really significant. And I think that it's really helpful to contextualize these numbers by trying to understand students' lived experiences of this. And also, I think this highlights why it can be so hard for students to succeed academically, right? She couldn't focus because she was hungry. Plus, she didn't have time to deal with classes or assignments. And also the stigma that some students deal with in terms of making it's really hard to admit that you might need help, and help-seeking behavior is often stigmatized, and students don't want to go to the pantry because they don't want other students to see them going. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot going on. And I thought that this quote was a really good one at sort of highlighting all of the issues that students are facing. Okay, so now that I've shared some of our research, I want to share some of the programming that's been happening. So what have we been doing to address this problem on campus? So as I mentioned, and as Dean Lawson mentioned, we have the Rutgers Student Food Pantry in New Brunswick. It opened in 2016. All students are welcome. No questions are asked. The only thing you need to show is your Rutgers ID. And since it opened in 2016, it has served over 1,000 students. Some of those students come frequently. Some of those students might just be in a period where they need a helping hand, and they might only come once or twice. So there's a real variability in how often those students use them, but there have been a lot of students coming in and out. So during COVID, they had to relocate from that building that I showed in one of the first slides on Main Street over to the graduate student lounge, because they couldn't do social distancing in their original space. And so during COVID, they packed up food for students and would operated by appointment. Students could come and they would get bags of food from the pantry. They also, and I should say that it's not just food, they provide toiletries and other kinds of personal hygiene items. During COVID, they also received funding to have a mobile pantry. So they had a van that would go from campus to campus on a schedule, and students at Bush or Livingston or wherever they were, Cook Douglas, could go and pick up food directly from the van. So they didn't have to worry about getting on the bus or traveling. And this was really successful, and students really appreciated this. On September 1st of 2021, they were very excited to open their brand new food pantry space in the basement of the College Ave Student Center. And if you think back to what happened in New Jersey on September 1st of 2021, especially something that happened that might affect a basement, you might recall that the remnants of Hurricane Ida came through New Brunswick on September 1st. So on the very first day that the pantry space opened, it flooded and they had to move. So, but Carrie took it in stride, and they continue to serve students, but I do believe they are back in this space now. Okay, so in addition to having shelf-stable foods, the pantry offers a couple of different ways for students to get healthier, fresh produce. So one is that they provide market bucks, which is a program that Laura mentioned through the New Brunswick Community Farmers Market. And this actually works also at the Rutgers Gardens Farmers Market, where students are given coupons for free fresh fruits and vegetables. And it's really great. They can go to the market, they can shop, they can pick and choose what vegetables they wish to get. And then also the Rutgers Student Farm donates food on a weekly basis to the student food pantry. They've donated tens of thousands of dollars worth of fresh produce. And Carrie reports that whatever day they're putting out the fresh produce from the market is the busiest day at the pantry, that's when students want to be there. That's when students are excited to come and get their shelf-stable food and their fresh produce as well. We also have a program called Meal Swipes for Charity, and this is called Swipe Out Hunger at a lot of schools. It's a common approach to addressing food insecurity, where students can donate their guest meal swipes. They can donate the cost of those meal swipes, or they can donate the actual meal swipes, so they can give it to another student who can then use that meal swipe, depending on how the program is running at any point in time. But that's a really great way that students can be involved with this. And then the Dean of Students. So the Dean of Students office provides referrals to and from the student food pantry. They also provide assistance with SNAP enrollment. And it's important, SNAP is a really great program that has traditionally not been available for college students. It's the largest federal nutrition assistance program. And college students had been required to work 20 hours a week to be eligible for SNAP. And during the pandemic, those rules have changed temporarily, but we're hoping that those changes might become permanent. And there's a lot of advocacy going on around that. The Dean of Students also provides emergency funds, meal plans, grocery store gift cards, meal plan scholarships. And then a program that I've been most involved in and that I'm most excited about, because I think is really innovative, is the Food Insecurity Screen and Intervene program at Rutgers Student Health. When students come into Rutgers Student Health, they fill out a survey about a number of things, including depression screenings and sexual assault history. And we've added 2 questions about food insecurity, so that if a student screens as food insecure, their healthcare provider will get a little note about that, and they'll hand them this postcard that's meant to look like a prescription. They'll say, I think you might be having a hard time affording food. Here is a prescription for the student food pantry and the Dean of Students. We think it might help you to seek out some resources there. So on a bigger picture level, we also have the New Brunswick Chancellor's Task Force on Student Essentials Needs that was created in 2019. I know there's one in Newark as well. This is led by Vice Chancellor Sal Mena from the Division of Student Affairs. And we're looking at policies and sort of what can we do university-wide, or at least New Brunswick-wide, to address not only food insecurity, but also housing insecurity, homelessness, all of those other transportation insecurity, technology insecurity, all of those essential needs that students have in order to succeed. I wanted to also mention that the Rutgers Board of Trustees has been very generous and has donated significant sums to support students in financial need. And some of this money goes to all 3 campus food pantries. And then, as Laura mentioned, we were named one of the 11 hunger-free campuses in New Jersey, and we got approximately $100,000 along with Rutgers New Brunswick to support our ongoing work on food insecurity. So some of this will go toward further supporting the pantry, some will go to developing some new programming. So I just wanted to share one kind of happy alumnus success story. So if Carrie heard from a former student who used to use the pantry, she described him as a frequent flyer, someone who really relied on the student food pantry for their on a regular basis to be able to eat. And the student graduated in 2020, and just this past summer donated $15 to the food pantry. And he said, I couldn't have succeeded without the pantry. I want to pay it forward now that I've graduated, I've got a job, I'm food secure. I want to pay it forward so that other students can have the same success that I had. So I just thought that was an absolutely lovely story. And so finally, I just wanted to say thank you to my colleagues, many of them in student affairs and the higher education program, a number of my students who have worked on this research, the Office of Institutional Research who fields the surveys for us, and particularly to all of the students who have participated in the research and taken the time to help us to understand the issues that they're facing. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Kara. So do you have some questions? Kara, do you have an updated white paper about this issue? Don and I found your previous ones very helpful in explaining to others why addressing this is so important and how it is still affecting thousands of students across the US. Thanks, Penny.
Hi, Penny. Thanks for the question. So we do not have an updated white paper. We're not able to do, we have been sort of on a 3-year cycle for doing the surveys. And to be honest, we're still analyzing the data from the 2019 survey. We have one of a master's student who used the data is defending this week, and another one in a couple of weeks. We're still trying to really dig deep and analyze the data to understand what we have. We're hoping to do another survey in the next year. And once we do that, we will put out another white paper. But in the meantime, we're doing these more in-depth analyses, and I would be happy to send some of those papers to Penny or to anyone who would like to see them.
Okay, great. So you had mentioned about the swipes for charity. A question came in, are there ways that the university could invest in systems changes like donating cafeteria meal plans? So as apart from swipes for charity, are there ways to, if there's a surplus in meals that don't get used, is that something that can be utilized for something like this?
So that is a question that comes up very, very often, and the students often ask it too. And I think I saw Joe Charette in the list of attendees. I don't know if he's still out there, and he would be a far better person to answer this than I am. But my understanding is that the way that the meal plans are priced, they know how many unused meal swipes are likely to be there at the end of the semester. And that actually helps them to keep the prices lower. If every single meal swipe was used, the prices of the meal plans would be higher. So it's not really possible to just use up all those unused meal swipes. And also it would be an issue of students with meal plans subsidizing potentially students without, and it gets very complicated. But what we do have is that donation, the student to student donation, and that Swipe Out Hunger. We also had a large donation, I think in 2019, where some donors funded a meal plan scholarship program that was implemented in 2020 that's still being implemented. And so we're seeing how that is working out. And then there are also emergency funds that the Dean of Students office has. So if a student's in crisis, they can give out some emergency, like a meal plan with a set number of meals on it to help the student kind of get through that period of time. So there are different ways that we are using the dining services to help food insecure students, but it's not the only way. And that sort of simplistic, let's just use up all those leftover meal swipes, doesn't quite work financially.
Here's a question, maybe for both of you. At the heart of the issue is college affordability. How do we take a global view? For example, a greater effort on the front end with students to align costs to available resources. Is it too hard to align counselors with student needs? Moving off campus is a sign that dorm costs are too high for many students, so it just spirals the issue.
I might let Laura,
Yeah,
as the administrator, answer that one.
Frank, thank you for getting to the heart of it with that question. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we do need to be addressing this issue. I think some of the president's efforts to really advocate for student scholarships and student need-based support is one of the steps that we're taking locally at Rutgers. So we are acknowledging that our students need this, and we are trying to figure out ways to address it. Some of your question is more structural in terms of decreased federal and state support for public universities like Rutgers. But you really are addressing the bigger issue, and it is a struggle for many of our students.
And Joe Charette did respond, Kara, regarding the meal plans. They're priced at the average usage. So there are no meals left at the end of the semester that have been paid for that they could use. That answers that.
Can I say I would add one other thing, which is that we did a pilot program back in 2019 that we're hoping to do again, where we were able to use some rescued food from dining services and from some other places and serve them as a free lunch to Rutgers students at the College Ave Community Cafe. And it was a really big success. So it was an off-campus venue, but it's right on campus, but it's technically an off-campus venue. And we were able to use some of that recovered food to feed food insecure students. We had, in the course of the 2-week pilot, we had over 700 students come for free lunch. And that was exciting. And we're hoping to be able to do that again, sort of once things come a little bit more fully back to normal.
Okay. Penny has mentioned in terms of the swipes, the Rutgers women's golf team started that as part of a student-driven competition before the pandemic hit. And she mentions Emily Miller and Ashley Greenville of the team were so proactive about it. They gathered hundreds of swipes, and the Dean of Students expanded this effort to full meal cost swipes. And Kerry Wilson was very integral to that as well. And also Alex Sawatsky, director of the Rutgers Student Farm, grows and distributes thousands of pounds of fresh produce to the food pantry every year. Okay. You had mentioned, obviously, comparatively with other colleges and universities, how food insecurity is at Rutgers. Do you collaborate with those colleges and universities on this study?
Well, we don't. So the Hope Center is sort of its own entity. I will say that my former PhD student, Stephanie Brescia, graduated from Rutgers and went to work there for a year, but we hired her back. She's now at the Graduate School of Education on the faculty here. So we were a little bit, through her, but we do work with other schools in other ways, but the Hope Center really leads that national survey every year on its own. We at Rutgers have participated in that. Our students have been invited to participate in some years, but we don't participate in the years that we're doing our own survey because we don't want to overburden. And that's part of why we don't do the survey every year. It takes a while to analyze the data, but also there's so many surveys and so many things that we want to ask our students that we really have to be careful and kind of squeeze these surveys in so that we don't have, we're not burdening the students with these questions. So that's why.
Okay. So you've been doing these studies for a few years, and you did mention one alumnus. You got some feedback from them about where they are now. They're donating to the program, which is great. Have you gotten sort of broad-based feedback from people who were students who were food insecure that are now alumni, how they're doing? They're not food insecure anymore, reasons why, so forth?
I think Carrie would probably be the person who, she has more of the day-to-day contacts with the students. I'm sort of at a remove with the research piece, so I don't personally engage with them. That was a story that Carrie Wilson had relayed to me. So I don't know, but Laura, do you ever hear from any subs alums that have gone on to?
We have a fair number of students who have gone on to this, maybe not specifically related to campus food insecurity, but working in nonprofit organizations addressing issues of hunger and kind of community needs in multiple places that I can think of, both within the state as well as elsewhere. So I know that there's a growing interest amongst our current students to go into this kind of career, really seeing the need and we want to do as much stuff on campus so that we can equip them with those career goals so that they're, having experience in food pantries, having experience doing the kind of work that Kara does in terms of assessment and really understanding, what the issues are so that they're addressed correctly. So I foresee many of our future alumni will be in this sphere.
Right. And we do teach classes. Steph Brescia, that student who went to Hope Center, and I taught 2 classes on food insecurity in New Brunswick, and we incorporated a lot of student food insecurity work into that class. And I know in our food systems major, there's a lot of food insecurity that's taught in the classroom to our students.
Yeah, and Frank actually responded he was food insecure, and that's why he donates. So it's good to see.
Right. It affected his ability to concentrate. He said, yeah, absolutely. It is hard to concentrate if you're hungry. And it's also hard to concentrate if you're worrying about where your next meal is going to come from or how you're going to pay for it. And another thing, we asked this question in 2016, we asked if you ever had to decide between buying books and buying food. And I think about 1/3 of our students said, yeah. So that's another reason that you might not realize, but students actually sacrifice. Some students sacrifice buying books, other students sacrifice buying food, right? And neither of them is a good option.
Right. And a student responded in terms of doing surveys. She mentions that a lot of people like surveys. Maybe it's something that it could be done more often. I know you say you got to be careful about how much you survey people because it's a lot, but.
So I would love for people to, well, I shouldn't say this, to call the Office of Institutional Research. We can only do really one large student survey at a time. And there are so many important issues that we need to get feedback from our students on that we just can't do it that much more often. But we would like to, we did do some, we can do some smaller surveys, and we will do it again. But we also don't think food insecurity is changing. I mean, COVID was kind of an exception, but I don't think it changes that dramatically from year to year, that we need to do that burden. And I will also say that Penny mentioned, right, so we know Sarah Golder-Grob, we just don't collaborate on the studies with her, but she came to Rutgers in 2018. So Carrie and I co-organized a statewide food insecurity in higher education conference in 2018, and Sarah Golder-Grob was our keynote speaker. And I might as well do a plug right now. We are organizing another one using some of the funds from our Hunger Free Campus grant. We're organizing another one February 10th and 11th. And it will be a statewide convening. It will be online. We will have representatives from schools across the state. The Secretary of Higher Ed will be there, and we have a keynote speaker coming from California also. So, and Hope Center, we will be working with them a little bit on that, because through the Office of the Secretary of Higher Ed. So yes, I mean, we do know them, and we certainly use their research a lot. And like I said, Rutgers students have participated in the national survey at various points in time.
Okay.
Oh. And also the Student Center Pantry location is back open, and the elevator has been fixed. Okay, good. I thought it was reopened, but I wasn't 100% certain.
Yeah, I think that's what we have for questions.
Great. Well, I can wrap us up. On behalf of the Rutgers University Foundation, we'd like to thank Kara and Laura so much for sharing their time, wisdom, and expertise this afternoon. I personally really enjoyed learning more about this today. I hope you all did too. If you were inspired to make a difference by today's presentation, one way you can help is by supporting the Rutgers Student Food Pantries today for Giving Tuesday. I'm happy to say we've raised over $25,000 today so far for the 4 food pantries around the university. So I hope you will join me, if you haven't yet, in making a gift at support.rutgers.edu/feedamind. You can help Rutgers fill a plate and feed a mind today. Thank you so much to all of the attendees for joining us today. Please be safe, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.